My roommate Ren Sutter texted me at 2:14 in the afternoon with 4 words that ended my entire workday. Come home early. Please. No emoji. No explanation. Ren never said please twice in one sentence unless the building was on fire or she'd broken the good coffee grinder again. I sat in my cubicle at Halden Cross Architecture for exactly 90 more seconds, staring at a roof pitch I was supposed to be finalizing, before I told my project lead I had a family emergency and walked out with my laptop still open on my desk. My name is Nathan Reyes. I was 30 years old, a junior architect 2 years into a career I'd fought hard for, and for 3 years running, I had lived with the one person who could summon me across the city with 4 words and a missing exclamation point. I drove home faster than I should have. Portland traffic on a Thursday afternoon is not designed for a man convinced his roommate is either injured, evicted, or engaged to someone else, and my brain cycled through all 3 scenarios twice before I hit our street. Here is what you need to understand about Ren before I tell you what was waiting behind our apartment door. We met in a shared studio apartment listing 4 years ago, 2 strangers splitting rent because Portland had made living alone a luxury sport. She was finishing a degree in costume design. I was drawing basements for other people's dream houses. We were supposed to be roommates for 1 year, tops. A practical arrangement between 2 people who had nothing in common except a lease and a mutual hatred of the upstairs neighbor's drum practice. Instead, we became the kind of roommates who left each other notes shaped like arguments, who split a single lamp between 2 rooms by running an extension cord under the door, who developed a rating system for the apartment's questionable smells that ranged from concerning to evacuate. Ren sewed for a living, quietly building a reputation as one of the best alteration specialists in the city, the kind of seamstress brides begged to fit them in personally instead of settling for the boutique's junior staff. I drew buildings that mostly stayed on paper. We were both, in our own ways, people who built things other people would eventually stand inside of. And somewhere in year 2, we made a joke that stopped being a joke and neither of us noticed the exact moment it happened. It started at Marisol's wedding. Ren's cousin, big Catholic ceremony, open bar that closed too early. We were slow dancing badly at the edge of the reception because neither of us had a date, and the bouquet toss had just humiliated us both in different directions. Ren had her chin on my shoulder, and her voice went dry the way it does right before she says something she's going to pretend was a joke. If neither of us is married by 30, she said, we're doing this. You and me. No dating required. I already know your Sunday routine, and you already know I hate surprises, so honestly we're ahead of most couples. I laughed because it was funny, and because the alternative was admitting my chest had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with the champagne. Deal, I said. We shook on it right there on the dance floor like idiots, and somewhere a photographer caught the handshake instead of the kiss everyone else was posing for. For 2 years, the deal became our shorthand for every terrible date either of us survived. She'd come home from a man who spent 40 minutes explaining his crypto portfolio and say, the deal is looking better every week, Reyes. I'd get ghosted by someone I actually liked, and she'd slide a mug of tea across the counter and say, don't worry, you've got a backup plan. She's currently eating cereal for dinner in the next room. It was funny because it was safe. It was safe because neither of us believed it would ever actually come due. Then, 4 months ago, Ren got engaged. Not to me. To a corporate attorney named Preston who wore loafers with no socks and called our apartment cozy in a tone that meant small. I hated him with a specificity that scared me a little, and I told myself it was because he mispronounced quesadilla and not because he got to plan a future with the woman who left thread pins on the kitchen table like breadcrumbs. I helped her look at venues. I sat through 3 dinners where he explained billable hours to me unprompted. I stood in our kitchen while she held up fabric swatches for her own wedding dress and asked which ivory looked less hospital corridor, and I smiled and told her the one on the left, and I went to work the next day and stared at a wall for 40 minutes. I never said anything. That was the deal I actually lived by, the one I never announced out loud. If Ren was happy, I would be quiet. I had gotten very good at being quiet. 6 weeks ago, Preston left her 3 weeks before the wedding. Not gently. He left a note on the counter, an actual paper note, like he was too much of a coward to say it to her face, explaining that he'd realized marriage wasn't the right season for him. He'd taken his side of the closet and the espresso machine he'd bought as our anniversary gift and moved out while she was at work. I found her sitting on the kitchen floor with the note in her hand when I got home. I didn't ask questions. I sat down next to her on the cold tile, took the espresso-shaped hole in the cabinet as a personal insult on her behalf, and stayed there until 1 a.m. She didn't cry, not that night. Ren doesn't cry on schedule. She goes quiet and precise instead, like grief is a seam she has to press flat before she can look at it. For 6 weeks, we didn't talk about the wedding dress hanging in the back of her closet in its garment bag, half finished, because of course she'd been making it herself. Ren doesn't buy things she can build better. I didn't ask why she kept it instead of returning the fabric. Some things you don't poke at while they're still healing. Which brings me back to that Thursday afternoon and the 4 words that got me out of the office 90 seconds after they arrived. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, which tells you everything about the state of my nervous system. My hands were sweating on the doorknob before I even touched it, which was new. I'd had a key to that apartment for 3 years and never once approached it like a threat. I opened the door and stopped breathing. Ren was standing in the middle of our living room in a white dress. Not Preston's white dress. Not the half-finished one from the garment bag. This one was different, simpler, off the shoulder, the kind of dress that looked like it had been made by someone who understood exactly how a body wanted to move inside fabric instead of just how a body should look standing still. Her hair was down. There were pins still stuck in the hem where she hadn't finished the last few inches. She looked terrified and steady at the same time, which is a combination I didn't know a person's face could hold until I saw it on hers. "Before you say anything," she said, "this isn't what you think." "I don't think anything yet," I said, which was a lie. My brain had already sprinted through 4 different disasters and landed on the worst one. That Preston was back, that this was some reconciliation gesture, that I'd walked in on the epilogue to a story I wasn't part of. "I burned the other dress," she said, "the one I was making for him. I took it out back 3 days ago, and I burned it in the fire pit like a woman in a movie, and it felt incredible. And then I had all this fabric left over from the muslin tests, and I didn't know what to do with my hands, so I made a different one." "That explains the dress," I said carefully. "It doesn't explain the please." She looked down at the pins in the hem like she needed a second to find her nerve. When she looked back up, her voice had lost its joke armor completely, which almost never happened, not even at the wedding dance floor, not even the night the note appeared on the counter. "Do you remember the deal?" she asked. My chest did something complicated. Marisol's wedding. Bad champagne. 30 years old. "I turned 30 in 11 days, she said. "And I know it was a joke, Nathan. I know it started as a joke. But I've been sitting with this dress for 3 days trying to figure out who I actually pictured wearing it for, and it wasn't Preston, and it isn't some hypothetical man I haven't met yet. Every single time I imagined the door opening at the end of an aisle, it was you standing there. It's been you for longer than I want to admit, and I was too busy being engaged to someone safe and boring to notice I was already in love with someone terrifying and familiar." The apartment went very quiet. Somewhere upstairs, the drum-practicing neighbor started a beat and stopped it, like even he understood this wasn't the moment. "Ren," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to, "you are describing exactly what I have not been saying for 2 years." Her eyes went wide. 2 years? Since before Preston, I admitted. Since the fabric swatches, honestly, since before that. "I told you the ivory on the left looked better because you asked, not because I had an opinion about ivory. I have never once had an opinion about ivory. I had an opinion about you standing in our kitchen glowing about a wedding I didn't want to happen, and I said nothing because you were happy and I loved you enough to be quiet about it. That's the worst kind of loving someone, she said. But she was smiling now, unsteady and real. I'm aware, I said. I've had a lot of time to think about it. Mostly at 2 a.m., mostly in this apartment, mostly while you were asleep 12 feet away, completely unaware I was having an emotional crisis in the next room. She laughed, and it cracked a little in the middle, and that was the sound that finally moved my feet. I crossed the room. She met me halfway, careful of the pins, careful of everything except the part that mattered. So this dress, I said, close enough now that I could see the places where the stitching wasn't finished, small imperfections she would have hated on a client, but somehow made this dress look more like her than anything store-bought ever could. Who is it actually for? I was hoping, she said, that's a conversation we could have together. Not the deal. Not a joke. A real one. I don't want you because you're a backup plan, Nathan. I want you because you're the only plan that ever made sense, and it took me getting left at the almost altar to stop being too scared to say it. I reached up and tucked a loose pin back into the hem before it could fall, an excuse to touch the dress, an excuse to be close enough to feel her breath catch when my knuckles brushed her collarbone by accident. I have wanted to say something for 2 years, I said. I am done being quiet. Then I kissed her. It wasn't rushed, and it wasn't the kind of kiss you plan for in a doorway with a getaway car running. It was slow, deliberate, 3 years of unspoken breakfasts and shared lamps and 100 nights of pretending finally collapsing into one point of contact. She fisted a hand in my shirt like she needed something to hold on to in case the floor decided not to be solid anymore. I slid one hand to the small of her back, careful of the pins, careless of everything else. When we finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to my chin and let out a breath that sounded like 3 months of held tension finally exhaling. This is insane, she whispered. I called you home from work to stand in my living room in a wedding dress I made for a man who didn't exist yet. He existed, I said. He was just really committed to staying quiet in the next room. She laughed again, brighter this time, and pulled back to look at me properly. You're not freaked out? I basically just proposed to you in a half-finished dress with pins in my mouth an hour ago. Ren, I have loved you since roughly the 2nd month of this lease, when you alphabetized my spice rack out of spite, and I found it unreasonably attractive. I am not freaked out. I am furious it took us this long. To be fair, she said, you had 2 years to say something. To be fair, I said, you were engaged to a man who called this apartment cozy. He was the worst, she agreed instantly. No hesitation, which told me everything I needed to know about how little Preston had actually mattered in the end. We stood there a long time, her hands still fisted loosely in my shirt, the late afternoon light coming gold through the kitchen window the way it always did around 5, catching the dust in the air like the apartment itself was holding its breath along with us. That was when her phone rang on the counter, buzzing itself in a slow circle against the wood. She glanced at the screen and winced. It's Priya. She's been texting me all day about the dress, and I never answered. Priya Anand had been Ren's best friend since design school, the kind of friend who showed up at the apartment with wine the night Preston left and didn't say a single word about it being for the best, just poured 2 glasses and let Ren sit with it. She was also, I would learn later, the only person who had known about the burned dress in the fire pit before I did. Ren answered on speaker without thinking, still catching her breath, still standing there in white with pins in the hem. Hey, did you do it? Priya's voice came through immediately. No hello, no preamble. Did you finally say something to Nathan, or are you still standing in your living room having a crisis in a dress you made out of spite? Ren looked at me. I raised an eyebrow. You told her, I said. She helped me pick the fabric, Ren admitted. She's been asking me to tell you for a year. I believe her exact words last week were, I am one more ivory swatch away from telling him myself. I stand by that, Priya said cheerfully through the phone. So, report. I need details for the group chat. He kissed me, Ren said. I's not leaving mine. There was a beat of silence. And then Priya's voice cracked into something that sounded suspiciously like triumph. I am framing this phone call. I am putting it on my wall. Tell him I said it's about time. And tell him if he breaks her heart, I know exactly which seams to unpick on every article of clothing he owns. Duly noted, I said toward the phone. Ren hung up laughing, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere lighter than it had been an hour earlier, and set the phone face down on the counter like she was done sharing the moment with anyone else for a while. Eventually she stepped back, looked down at the dress, then back at me, mischief finally creeping back into her face like it had just remembered where it lived. For the record, she said, this isn't an actual proposal. I'm not asking you to marry me on a random Thursday in a half-sewn dress. Devastating, I said. I had a whole toast prepared. But, she said, and here her voice dropped into something quieter, more certain, I would like it to be a real one someday. Eventually. When there are no pins in the hem and no burned dress in the fire pit, as recent history. I can work with eventually, I said. I've had a lot of practice being patient with you. She swatted my arm, which is Ren for I love you when the words feel too big for the moment, and I understood the translation perfectly because I had been fluent in her for 3 years without ever admitting it out loud. 7 months later, on a warm September evening, I proposed for real. Not in the apartment. Not with pins in anyone's hem. I took her to the same reception hall where her cousin Marisol had gotten married 4 years earlier. The same dance floor where 2 idiots in their 20s had shaken hands on a joke that turned out to be the truest thing either of us ever said. I got down on one knee where the photographer had once caught our handshake instead of a kiss. And this time there was no mistaking what the camera was pointed at. She said yes before I finished the sentence. She always did hate waiting for the end of things she'd already decided about. We got married the following June, in a dress she designed herself from scratch. No burned attempts required this time, no half-finished hems. I stood at the end of the aisle exactly the way she'd pictured, exactly the way she told me she always had, long before either of us had the courage to say it out loud. Her father walked her down, and when the doors opened, she was smiling the way she'd smiled that Thursday afternoon in our living room, terrified and steady, all at once, and completely sure. We still live in that same Portland apartment, the one with the shared lamp and the extension cord under the door, though we finally bought 2 lamps like reasonable adults. Her sewing studio has taken over what used to be my home office, and my drafting table has taken over what used to be her fitting room. And somehow neither of us minds sharing space we used to guard so carefully. Some nights I still catch her holding up fabric swatches under the kitchen light, and I still tell her the one on the left looks better, and this time it's not a lie. This time I actually have an opinion about ivory. Turns out love will do that to a man. Every year on the anniversary of that Thursday, she pulls out the dress she made that day. Mended now, finished properly, hem-pinned exactly where it belongs, and hangs it in the doorway for one evening, just so we both remember what it looked like the moment we stopped being quiet. What would you have done if your roommate called you home from work and opened the door standing in a wedding dress made for no one but you? Has a joke you made with someone ever turned out to be the realest thing you've ever said? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this one got you, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.